Hello, my name is Henry Morris. I'm 32. I work as a carpenter, mostly residential renovations, and I've been putting off this physical for 3 years. 3 years of my insurance company sending increasingly stern letters. 3 years of my sister Julie nagging me every Sunday dinner. 3 years of telling myself I'd get around to it eventually. But here I am, sitting in this sterile examination room, watching Nurse Frances Lopez check my chart with the kind of focused attention that makes my chest tighten in ways that have nothing to do with medical anxiety. She's maybe 45, with silver threading through her dark hair that she keeps pulled back in a practical ponytail. There's something about the way she moves, efficient but not rushed, professional but warm. When she looks up from my file, her brown eyes meet mine directly, and I feel that familiar flutter of nervousness that I haven't experienced since high school. It's a routine exam, so take it off, she says, gesturing toward my shirt with clinical detachment. But her eyes say something different. There's a softness there, maybe even a flicker of something that makes me wonder if she's noticed the way I've been stealing glances at her since I walked in 20 minutes ago. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this room. Heart racing not from fear of needles or blood pressure cuffs, but from the realization that I might be developing feelings for someone I barely know. It started 6 months ago when I finally caved to the pressure and made the appointment. The receptionist, a cheerful woman named Betty, scheduled me with Dr. Martinez for a Thursday afternoon. I marked it on my calendar with the enthusiasm of someone scheduling a root canal, then promptly forgot about it until the reminder call came 2 days before. The medical center was one of those modern places, all glass and chrome with abstract art, that probably cost more than my truck. I filled out the paperwork, answered questions about family history and lifestyle habits with the kind of honesty that makes you realize how much pizza you actually eat in a week, and settled into wait. That's when I first saw her. Francis was talking to another patient, an elderly man who seemed confused about his medication schedule. She knelt beside his chair, speaking in low, patient tones, her hand resting gently on his arm. There was something about her presence that commanded attention without demanding it. She wasn't the youngest woman in the room, wasn't wearing makeup or jewelry beyond a simple wedding band that I tried not to stare at, but she had this quality that drew my eye every time she moved through the waiting area. I found myself hoping she'd be involved in my appointment somehow, then feeling ridiculous for the thought. I'm a grown man who builds things with his hands for a living. I shouldn't be getting nervous about attractive nurses like some teenager with a crush. Dr. Martinez turned out to be an efficient, no-nonsense physician who ran through the basics with professional thoroughness. Blood pressure, reflexes, the usual questions about exercise and diet that made me promise to cut back on beer and actually use the gym membership I'd been paying for but ignoring. The whole thing took maybe 20 minutes, and I left feeling both relieved and oddly disappointed that I hadn't seen Francis again. But life has a way of creating second chances, doesn't it? 3 weeks later, I was back in the same medical center, this time in the emergency room with a nasty cut on my forearm from a table saw that had decided to remind me why safety guards exist. The cut wasn't deep enough for stitches, but it was bleeding enough to worry my client, Mr. Peterson, who insisted on driving me to get it looked at. The emergency room was busy that evening, filled with the usual mix of worried parents with sick children, construction workers like myself who'd had unfortunate encounters with power tools, and elderly folks who seemed to treat the place like a social club. I was triaged by a tired-looking nurse who cleaned the wound and told me someone would be with me shortly. That someone turned out to be Frances. She appeared at my bedside with a gentle smile and a small cart of supplies, her presence immediately calming in the chaotic environment of the emergency room. "Mr. Morris, right? Looks like you had an argument with a saw and lost." Her voice had a slight accent, something that suggested childhood summers in New Mexico or maybe Texas. When she began cleaning the wound more thoroughly, her touch was careful but confident, the kind of competence that comes from years of experience. "Happens more often than I'd like to admit," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as she worked. "Usually when I'm rushing to finish a project." "What kind of work do you do?" she asked, applying antiseptic with practiced efficiency. "Custom carpentry, mostly. Kitchen renovations, built-in furniture, that sort of thing. Today I was working on a dining room table for a client who's hosting Thanksgiving next week." She paused in her work, looking up at me with genuine interest. "You make furniture? That's wonderful. There's something special about creating things that last, that become part of people's homes and memories. The way she said it, with real appreciation rather than polite small talk, made something warm spread through my chest. Most people hear carpenter and think of rough construction work or quick fixes. Frances seemed to understand that what I do is closer to art than simple labor. "Do you have family coming for Thanksgiving?" she asked, returning to bandaging my arm. "Just me and my sister Julie and her family. She's been after me to find someone to bring to dinner. Says I'm getting too comfortable being alone." Frances smiled at that, an expression that reached her eyes and made small lines appear at the corners. "Sisters have a way of thinking they know what's best for us, don't they? You have experience with that?" 3 older sisters, all married with children, all convinced that my life would be complete if I'd just find the right man and settle down. She secured the bandage with gentle pressure. "They mean well, but sometimes I think they forget that happiness comes in different forms for different people." There was something in her tone, a hint of loneliness or maybe resignation, that made me want to ask more questions. But before I could figure out how to do that without overstepping, she was finishing up, giving me instructions for wound care and telling me to follow up with my regular doctor if there were any signs of infection. "Thank you," I said as she prepared to move on to the next patient. Not just for the medical care, but for the conversation. "It's been a rough day, and you made it better." She paused at that, studying my face with those warm brown eyes. "Take care of yourself, Henry, and maybe invest in some better safety equipment." The fact that she remembered my first name, used it so naturally, stayed with me for days afterward. I found myself thinking about her at odd moments, wondering about her life outside the medical center, curious about what made her smile that way. 2 months passed before I saw her again. This time it was intentional, sort of. I'd been having some persistent back pain from a particularly challenging installation job, the kind of deep ache that ibuprofen couldn't touch. My sister Julie, who works as a physical therapist, finally convinced me to see someone about it rather than just complaining every time I got out of bed. The orthopedic clinic was in the same medical complex, and I'll admit I hoped Frances might work there too. She didn't, but fate has a sense of humor. I was leaving my appointment, feeling optimistic about the physical therapy plan Dr. Reynolds had outlined, when I literally ran into her in the parking lot. "Henry," she said, steadying herself after our collision. "How's the arm healing?" She remembered, not just my name, but the specific injury from months ago. I looked down at my forearm, where only a faint scar remained visible. "Good as new, thanks to your excellent care. I'm here for my back this time." Apparently 32 is old enough to start falling apart. Frances laughed, a sound that was both musical and genuine. "Welcome to adulthood. It's all maintenance from here." We stood there for a moment, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the parking lot. She was off duty, wearing jeans and a soft blue sweater that brought out the warmth in her eyes. Without the clinical setting and medical scrubs, she seemed more approachable, more human somehow. "Can I ask you something?" I said, surprising myself with my boldness. "Would you like to get coffee sometime? I mean, if that's appropriate. I don't want to make things awkward if we run into each other here again." She tilted her head, considering the question with the same careful attention she'd given my medical care. "I'd like that," she said finally. "But I should tell you, I'm not really looking for anything serious. My divorce was finalized last year, and I'm still figuring out who I am on my own." The mention of divorce explained the absence of the wedding ring I'd noticed during our first encounter. It also explained some of the sadness I'd glimpsed in her eyes. "I'm not looking for serious either," I lied, because the truth was I'd been thinking about her for months, and that felt pretty serious to me. "Just coffee between 2 people who keep running into each other in medical settings." We exchanged numbers and made plans to meet at a small cafe downtown the following Saturday. As I drove home, I realized I was grinning like an idiot and didn't care who saw me. The coffee date was supposed to be casual, just an hour or 2 of conversation between acquaintances. It lasted 4 hours. We talked about everything and nothing, the kind of meandering conversation that reveals more about a person than any formal interview ever could. Frances told me about growing up in El Paso, the youngest of 4 daughters in a family that valued education and hard work above all else. She'd moved to our city 15 years ago when her ex-husband got a job transfer, had built a career she loved in nursing, made friends, and put down roots. When the marriage ended, she'd considered moving back to Texas, but realized this place had become home in ways that had nothing to do with him. I told her about learning carpentry from my grandfather, about the satisfaction of transforming raw wood into something beautiful and functional, about the small business I'd built through word-of-mouth referrals and stubborn attention to detail. We discovered a shared appreciation for old movies, a mutual inability to keep houseplants alive, and a similar sense of humor that ran toward the dry and observational. "You're not what I expected," she said as we finally prepared to leave, the cafe staff clearly ready to close around us. "What did you expect? Someone younger, maybe. Someone who'd be intimidated by a woman who's been married and divorced, who has a career and opinions and baggage." She gathered her purse, avoiding my eyes. "Most men my age are looking for someone in their 20s, or they're so bitter from their own divorces that they can't see past their anger." "I'm not most men," I said, meaning it more than I'd meant anything in a long time. She looked up at me then, searching my face for something. "No, I don't think you are." We started seeing each other regularly after that, though neither of us called it dating. Coffee turned into lunch. Lunch became dinner. Dinner evolved into long walks through the downtown area, where I'd point out architectural details and she'd share stories from her shifts at the medical center. Frances was unlike anyone I'd ever been involved with. She was confident in ways that had nothing to do with arrogance, intelligent without being condescending, funny in a way that caught me off guard. She'd lived through things I was just beginning to understand, had navigated challenges that made my own problems seem manageable by comparison. There was also an emotional depth to her that I found both attractive and intimidating. She'd been married for 12 years to a man who gradually became a stranger, had weathered the slow dissolution of a relationship she'd once thought would last forever. She talked about it without bitterness, but with the kind of hard-earned wisdom that comes from surviving disappointment. "I spent so many years trying to be the person I thought he wanted," she told me one evening as we walked along the river trail. "Quieter, more agreeable, less challenging. It took me a long time to remember who I actually am." "And who is that?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, watching the water move past us in the fading light. "Someone who asks questions, who isn't satisfied with easy answers. Someone who believes in taking care of people but refuses to disappear in the process. Someone who's learned the difference between being alone and being lonely." I wanted to tell her that she didn't have to be either, that I was falling for exactly the person she was describing. But something held me back, maybe the knowledge that she was still healing, still figuring out how to trust again. The physical attraction between us was undeniable but unspoken. There were moments when our hands would brush reaching for the same menu, times when she'd laugh and lean into me, occasions when I'd catch her looking at me with an expression that made my pulse quicken. But we moved slowly, carefully, like two people who'd both learned that rushing towards something doesn't guarantee you'll catch it. If you're enjoying this story and wondering where it's headed, hype this video up. Sometimes the best connections develop in their own time, and I'd love to know if you've experienced something similar. It was Frances who finally acknowledged what was happening between us. We'd been seeing each other for 2 months when she invited me to her apartment for dinner. It was a small, warm space filled with books and plants that somehow thrived under her care despite her claims of botanical incompetence. She cooked with the same careful attention she brought to her nursing, creating a meal that was both simple and perfect. After dinner, we sat on her couch with glasses of wine, talking about our respective weeks. She'd had a particularly difficult shift, losing an elderly patient she'd grown fond of over several months of treatment. "It never gets easier," she said, curled against the corner of the couch with her legs tucked under her. "You'd think after all these years I'd developed some kind of professional distance, but I haven't. Every patient matters, every loss hurts. Maybe that's what makes you good at what you do," I suggested. "The fact that you still care, that it still affects you." She looked at me then with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You have a way of seeing the best in things, don't you? In people?" "I see what's there." "What do you see when you look at me?" The question caught me off guard with its directness, its vulnerability. Frances wasn't someone who asked for reassurance lightly. "I see someone who's brave enough to care even when it hurts. Someone who's built a life she's proud of, who's survived disappointment without becoming cynical. I see someone beautiful and complicated and worth knowing." She set down her wine glass and moved closer to me on the couch. "Henry, I need you to know that I haven't done this in a long time. Haven't let someone get close, haven't trusted anyone with the parts of me that are still healing. We don't have to rush anything," I said, though every nerve in my body was screaming the opposite. "That's just it," she said, reaching up to touch my face with gentle fingers. "I don't want to wait anymore. I've spent the last year being careful, protecting myself, keeping people at a safe distance. But you make me want to take risks again." When she kissed me, it was with the kind of intention that comes from careful consideration, from choosing to be vulnerable despite the potential for hurt. Her lips were soft and warm, and she tasted like the wine we'd been sharing and something uniquely her own. The next few months were a revelation. Being with Frances was like discovering a part of myself I hadn't known was missing. She brought out qualities in me that previous relationships had never touched, made me want to be more thoughtful, more present, more emotionally available. We fell into a routine that felt natural despite our different schedules. She worked 3 12-hour shifts a week, which meant she had more days off than most people, but worked intensely when she was on. I tried to arrange my project timelines around her schedule, wanting to maximize the time we could spend together. She'd come to job sites sometimes during her lunch breaks, bringing sandwiches and sitting on sawhorses while I worked. There was something deeply satisfying about having her there, watching me create something with my hands while she told me about her patients or shared observations about the world that made me see things differently. "You get this look when you're working," she told me one afternoon, watching me sand a cabinet door I'd been shaping for hours. "Completely focused, like nothing else exists. I love watching you in that state." "It's meditative," I said, running my hand along the smooth wood grain. "All the noise in my head goes quiet, and it's just me and the material and the vision of what it could become." That's how I feel sometimes at work, when everything clicks and I know exactly what a patient needs. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm meant to do. These conversations revealed layers of compatibility I hadn't expected. We both took pride in work that served others. Both found satisfaction in craftsmanship and attention to detail. We both valued competence and kindness. Both believed that how you treat people when they're vulnerable says everything about who you really are. The age difference that I'd worried might be an issue turned out to be one of the things I appreciated most about our relationship. Frances had a perspective that came from experience, a groundedness that balanced my sometimes impulsive nature. She'd lived through enough to know what mattered and what didn't, had developed the kind of emotional intelligence that only comes from navigating real challenges. At the same time, she seemed to appreciate my enthusiasm for things she'd forgotten to notice, my willingness to be excited about small discoveries or unexpected opportunities. "You make me feel young again," she told me once. "Not in a way that makes me forget my age, but in a way that reminds me that wonder doesn't have an expiration date." Our physical relationship developed with the same careful intention that characterized everything else between us. Frances was comfortable with her body in a way that was both sexy and refreshing, confident without being self-conscious, generous without being performative. She knew what she wanted and wasn't afraid to ask for it, which made intimacy feel like a conversation rather than a guessing game. I wasted too many years pretending to be satisfied with less than I needed, she told me one morning, lying in my bed with sunlight streaming through the windows. "I'm not going to do that anymore, not about anything." I was falling in love with her, deeply and completely, in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. The problem was I wasn't sure she felt the same way. She cared about me, that was obvious. She enjoyed my company, was attracted to me, seemed genuinely happy when we were together. But there was still a part of her that felt held back, protected, like she was keeping something in reserve just in case. The turning point came 4 months into our relationship, on a Thursday evening when I was supposed to meet her for dinner after her shift. She called me just as I was leaving my apartment, her voice tight with stress. "I can't make dinner tonight," she said. "We had a situation at work, and I need to stay late to finish paperwork and decompress. I'm sorry, I know we had plans." "Don't apologize," I said. "Bad day. The worst. We lost someone we shouldn't have lost, someone young with kids. The family is devastated, and I keep thinking about what we could have done differently." I could hear the exhaustion and grief in her voice, the weight of responsibility that healthcare workers carry even when they've done everything right. "Where are you now?" I asked. "Still at the medical center. I'm sitting in my car in the parking lot trying to pull myself together enough to drive home." "Stay there. I'm coming to get you." "Henry, you don't have to do that. I just need some time to process this." "I know I don't have to. I want to." I found her in the parking lot 20 minutes later, sitting in her small sedan with the windows down, staring at nothing. When she saw me approaching, she got out of the car and walked straight into my arms, holding on like I was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become unstable. We stood there for several minutes, not talking, just holding each other while she let herself feel the full weight of what she'd experienced. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red but dry. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Where do you want to go? Your place? Mine? Somewhere else entirely. Yours, if that's okay. I don't want to be alone tonight. But I also don't want to be around my own stuff, my own reminders of normal life." We drove to my apartment in convoy, her following me through the familiar streets. Once there, I made tea while she sat on my couch, still in her scrubs, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked, settling beside her with 2 steaming mugs. She was quiet for a long time, sipping her tea and gathering her thoughts. When she finally spoke, it was with the measured tone of someone who's learned to process trauma professionally but still feels it personally. "He was 35, a construction worker like you. Came in with chest pain that seemed minor, routine. We ran the standard tests. Everything looked normal. But something felt off to me, some instinct I couldn't name. I wanted to keep him for observation, run additional tests." She paused, setting down her tea with hands that trembled slightly. "The attending physician disagreed. Said I was being overly cautious, that we needed the bed space for more serious cases. He discharged the patient with instructions to follow up with his regular doctor. 3 hours later, he collapsed at home. Massive heart attack. His wife called 911, but it was too late. I felt my own chest tighten, both from empathy for the family's loss and from the recognition that it could have been me, could be any of us." "You trusted your instincts," I said. "That's what good nurses do." But I didn't fight hard enough for them. I deferred to authority instead of advocating for my patient. I let hierarchy override my clinical judgment, and now a man is dead and his children don't have a father. The guilt in her voice was devastating. I could see how this was eating at her, how she was taking responsibility for a system failure that was much larger than any individual decision. "Francis, look at me." I waited until her eyes met mine. "You can't save everyone. You can't fight every battle, especially when you're fighting against people who have more power than you do. What you can do is learn from this and keep trusting your instincts in the future. What if my instincts are wrong? What if I push for something unnecessary and waste resources that could help someone else? Then you'll deal with that when it happens. But right now, today, your instincts told you something was wrong, and you were right. That matters, even if the outcome wasn't what any of us would have wanted." She leaned against me then, letting herself be held and comforted in a way that felt both intimate and necessary. We sat like that for a long time, not talking, just being present with each other and with the weight of what she was carrying. "I've been thinking about us," she said eventually, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "What about us? About how scared I am of caring too much, of letting you become too important to me. I've been holding back, keeping part of myself protected, because I know how much it hurts when something good ends." My heart started beating faster, sensing that we were approaching something significant. But tonight, when everything felt terrible and overwhelming, the first person I wanted to call was you. The only person I wanted to see was you. That means something, doesn't it? "It means everything," I said, tightening my arms around her. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Henry. Actually, I think I've been in love with you for weeks and just haven't been brave enough to admit it." The relief that flooded through me was almost overwhelming. "I've been in love with you since our second coffee date," I admitted. "Maybe since the first one. I've just been waiting for you to catch up." She pulled back to look at me, her eyes bright with tears that seemed to be equal parts grief and joy. "I'm still scared. I'm still figuring out how to trust again, how to be in a relationship without losing myself." "We'll figure it out together," I said. "No rush, no pressure. Just us, taking it one day at a time." She kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of promise. It felt like a beginning, like we were finally starting something we'd both been circling around for months. That brings us back to today, 6 months later, sitting in this examination room where it all started. Well, not exactly where it started, but close enough to feel like a full circle moment. Francis had suggested I finally get that physical I'd been putting off, and when I mentioned I'd probably just go back to Dr. Martinez, she'd offered to assist with the appointment. Professional curiosity, she'd said with a smile that suggested her interest was anything but purely professional. Now here we are, and she's just told me to take off my shirt for the routine examination. But there's nothing routine about the way she's looking at me, nothing clinical about the slight flush in her cheeks, or the way her breathing has changed since we've been alone in this room. Francis, I say, not moving to remove my shirt yet. Are you sure this is appropriate? I mean, given our relationship. She sets down my chart and moves closer, her expression shifting from professional to personal in a way that makes my pulse quicken. Probably not, she admits. But Dr. Martinez is running late, and I thought maybe we could have a few minutes to ourselves. In an examination room? At your workplace? When was the last time we had any privacy? She asks, and she has a point. Between her work schedule and my current project deadlines, we've barely seen each other in the past 2 weeks. Besides, I've been thinking about what you look like under those work shirts. The admission surprises me. Francis is usually more reserved, especially in professional settings. But there's something different about her today, something more open and playful than usual. You've seen me without a shirt plenty of times, I point out. Not in a medical setting. There's something about the clinical environment that makes everything feel more significant. I understand what she means. There's an intimacy to medical care that's different from other kinds of physical closeness, a vulnerability that comes from being examined and cared for by someone who knows your body professionally as well as personally. Slowly, I unbutton my work shirt and shrug it off, hanging it on the hook behind the door. Francis watches with an expression that's part medical professional, part woman in love, and entirely focused on me. Any concerns I should know about? She asks, moving closer with her stethoscope. Just the usual aches and pains from getting older. You're 32, not 92. She places the cold metal against my chest, and I inhale sharply at the contact. Sorry, I should have warmed it up first. It's okay. I trust you. She moves the stethoscope methodically, listening to my heart and lungs with professional thoroughness. But there's nothing professional about the way her free hand rests against my shoulder, or the way she's standing closer than strictly necessary. Your heart rate is elevated, she observes. I wonder why. She smiles at that, the kind of smile that's both knowing and innocent. Could be anxiety about the medical examination. Could be. Or it could be something else entirely. The something else is standing inches away from me, wearing scrubs that somehow make her look more beautiful than any evening dress ever could. The something else is the woman I've been in love with for months, who's finally letting herself love me back without reservation. Francis, I say, my voice rougher than I intended. Yes, I love you. Not just because you're taking care of me, not just because you're beautiful, but because you're you. Because you make me want to be better than I am. Because you see the world in ways that challenge me to see it differently too. She sets down the stethoscope and looks at me with those warm brown eyes that first caught my attention in a medical center waiting room. I love you too, Henry. More than I thought I could love anyone again. More than I thought I deserved to be loved. You deserve everything good. I tell her, reaching up to cup her face in my hands. You deserve to be happy, to be cherished, to be with someone who sees how incredible you are. I'm still scared sometimes, she admits. Still worried that I'll mess this up somehow, that I don't know how to be in a healthy relationship. We'll figure it out together, I say, echoing the promise I made to her that difficult night months ago. No rush, no pressure. Just us, learning as we go. She kisses me then, soft and sweet and full of all the things we're still learning to say to each other. When we break apart, she rests her forehead against mine, and I can feel her smiling. Dr. Martinez is going to be here any minute, she says. Probably. And we're in an examination room at my workplace. We are. And I'm supposed to be conducting a professional medical examination. You are. So we should probably behave ourselves. Probably. But neither of us moves away. We stand there, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, existing in this perfect moment where everything feels possible and nothing feels rushed. After your appointment, Francis says, would you like to come over for dinner? I could make that pasta dish you like. I'd love that. And maybe we could talk about taking a weekend trip together. I have 3 days off next month, and I was thinking we could drive up to the mountains, find a cabin somewhere quiet. The suggestion makes something warm spread through my chest. A weekend away together feels like another step forward, Another way of choosing each other and this relationship we're building. I'd like that very much. There's a knock on the door then, followed by Dr. Martinez's voice asking if we're ready to begin. Francis steps back, instantly transforming back into the professional nurse I first met, though the warmth in her eyes remains. "Ready when you are, doctor," she calls out, then looks at me with a smile that's both professional and personal. "This is going to be the most thorough physical exam you've ever had." As Dr. Martinez enters the room, I realize that Francis was right about one thing. There is something significant about being cared for by someone who loves you, something meaningful about trust and vulnerability and the willingness to be seen completely. But more than that, there's something beautiful about finding love in unexpected places, about discovering that the person who can heal your body might also be the person who can heal your heart. Sometimes the best connections develop slowly, carefully, with the kind of attention and care that Francis brings to everything she does. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, a routine examination becomes the beginning of something extraordinary.